The pawnbroker's hands trembled as Clara Coleman placed her mother's silver locket on the scarred wooden counter, the last piece of her former life she had left to surrender. She had already sold her father's watch, her grandmother's pearl earrings, the gold ring that had belonged to her aunt, and even the wool coat that would have kept her warm through another Boston winter, all to scrape together enough money for a single train ticket heading west to Nevada Territory in the spring of 1875. "This here's real silver," the pawnbroker said, examining the delicate filigree work through his scratched spectacles. "Worth about $8, I'd say." Clara's throat tightened. $8 would be just enough. Combined with what she had hidden in the worn leather purse tucked beneath her threadbare dress, she would have exactly $43.75, the precise cost of a third-class ticket from Boston to Eldorado Canyon, Nevada. "I'll take it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the street noise filtering through the grimy shop windows. The pawnbroker counted out the bills slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind. But Clara had no intention of changing her mind. Behind her, somewhere in the tangled streets of Boston's North End, men were searching for her, men who worked for Marcus Whitfield, the textile mill owner who had decided that Clara belonged to him simply because she had once worked in his factory and caught his eye. Men who would drag her back to face consequences she could not bear to imagine after she had refused his advances and fled his locked office through a second-story window 3 nights ago. She took the money with hands that had become steady with determination, tucked it carefully into her purse, and walked out of the pawn shop into the gray March afternoon. The train station was 6 blocks away. She had no luggage, no extra clothes, nothing but the thin dress she wore, a shawl with more holes than fabric, and scuffed boots that had walked too many miles on too many hard streets. Everything she had once possessed now belonged to the pawnbroker or had been sold to other merchants across the city. The station was crowded with afternoon travelers, businessmen in fine suits and families with trunks and hat boxes. Clara kept her head down as she approached the ticket window, hyper-aware of every man in a dark coat, every set of footsteps that seemed to follow too closely. "1 ticket to Eldorado Canyon, Nevada," she said to the clerk, pushing her carefully counted bills and coins through the brass opening. The clerk raised his eyebrows. "That's a mining town, miss. Not much there for a lady traveling alone." "I have family there," Clara lied smoothly. She had no family anywhere. Her parents had died of influenza when she was 16, leaving her orphaned and alone in a city that devoured the vulnerable. But the clerk did not need to know that. No one needed to know that she was running toward nothing, only away from something terrible. The clerk shrugged and processed her ticket. "Train leaves in 45 minutes from Platform 7. It's a long journey, miss. 4 days if the weather holds and there are no delays. You'll want to bring food and water." Clara nodded, though she had no money for food or water. She would manage. She had become very good at managing. She found Platform 7 and positioned herself behind a pillar where she could watch the crowd without being easily seen. The minutes crawled past like hours. Every time a man in a dark coat appeared, her heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized the feeling now, this constant state of alert, the way her body had learned to prepare for flight at any moment. She had been running in one way or another since Marcus Whitfield had first cornered her in the mill storage room 6 months ago, his breath hot and whiskey soaked against her face as he pressed her against the rough wooden shelves. "All aboard for the Western Line," the conductor's voice rang out across the platform. "Departing for Albany, Buffalo, Chicago, Omaha, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, and all points to Nevada Territory." Clara moved quickly, keeping her head down as she climbed aboard the third-class car. The seats were hard wooden benches, already crowded with immigrants, miners, and drifters. She found a space near the back next to a window and pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small and unremarkable as possible. The train lurched forward with a great hiss of steam and grinding of metal wheels. Clara watched through the smudged window as Boston began to slide away, the gray buildings and crowded streets gradually giving way to open countryside. Only when the city had completely disappeared behind them did she allow herself to breathe fully, to let her shoulders drop from the hunched position of constant vigilance. She would not need to run again, could not run again. This train was carrying her to the very edge of everything she knew, to a place so far away that Marcus Whitfield's influence and money could not reach. In Nevada Territory, She could disappear. She could become someone new. She could be free. The journey west was every bit as difficult as the ticket clerk had warned. Clara had no food, so she went hungry, accepting only occasional sips of water from a kind German woman traveling with her 3 children. She slept sitting upright, her body swaying with the motion of the train, jolting awake at every stop to make sure no one had followed her aboard. The other passengers mostly ignored her, wrapped up in their own journeys and hardships. By the 3rd day, hunger had become a constant gnawing pain in her stomach. Clara's head felt light, and the landscape rolling past the windows seemed to shimmer and waver in the heat. They had left the green eastern states behind, passing through the endless prairies, and now entering the harsh, beautiful desert country of Nevada territory. The sky stretched vast and impossibly blue above rust-colored rocks and scattered sagebrush. It looked like another world entirely, nothing like the cramped gray streets of Boston. "First time out west?" the German woman asked in her thick accent, offering Clara a piece of hard bread. Clara accepted it gratefully, her pride long since abandoned in favor of survival. "Yes, thank you." "It is hard country," the woman said, settling her youngest child more comfortably on her lap. "But it is free. No one cares who you were before, only who you are now." Clara nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. That was exactly what she needed. A place where she could shed her past like an old skin and emerge as someone new. The train pulled into Eldorado Canyon on a scorching afternoon in late March. The town was smaller than Clara had imagined, just a single dusty street lined with weathered wooden buildings. The train station was little more than a covered platform with a small office. Beyond the town, massive red rock cliffs rose up against the brilliant sky, and Clara could see the dark openings of mine shafts dotting the hillsides. She climbed down from the train, on legs that trembled with exhaustion and hunger. The heat hit her like a physical force, so different from Boston's damp cold that for a moment she could only stand there, blinking in the harsh sunlight. Other passengers disembarked around her, most of them men in dusty work clothes heading for the mines. A few women stepped down, wives joining husbands, or perhaps working women heading for the saloons and boarding houses. Clara had no plan beyond arriving here. She looked up and down the street, trying to determine where she might find work, where she might sleep that night. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "You all right, miss?" a voice asked. Clara turned to find herself looking at a tall man in his mid-20s, dressed in worn denim pants, a faded shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the brutal sun. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of coffee. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, with fine lines around his eyes from squinting into bright light. A gun belt hung at his hips, and his boots were scuffed with hard use. "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, though she swayed slightly as she spoke. The man's eyes narrowed with concern. "You don't look fine. You look about ready to fall over. When did you last eat?" Clara opened her mouth to lie, but the world tilted suddenly, and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and then she was being carried, her head resting against a broad chest. She tried to protest, but the words would not come. Everything had become distant and hazy. When awareness returned, Clara found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small, clean room. A wet cloth rested on her forehead, and the tall man from the train station sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her with those concerned brown eyes. "Welcome back," he said quietly. "You gave me quite a scare." Clara tried to sit up, but he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy now. You fainted from hunger and exhaustion. I'm Parker Vaughn. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles outside town. I was here picking up supplies when I saw you get off the train." "I'm Clara Coleman," she said, her voice hoarse. "I apologize for the trouble. I'll be on my way." "On your way where?" Parker asked, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "You have any place to go in Eldorado Canyon?" Clara's silence was answer enough. Parker leaned back in his chair. "I brought you to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson runs it, and she's a good woman. I've paid for you to have this room for 3 nights and 3 meals a day. That should give you time to recover your strength and figure out your next move." Clara stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because you needed help," Parker said simply, "and because I've seen that look before, the look of someone running from something terrible, hoping the West is far enough away to finally stop running." Clara's throat tightened. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Parker stood, reaching for his hat. Get some rest. Eat when Mrs. Henderson brings you food. In 3 days, if you still need help finding work or a place to stay, you can find me at the Vaughn Ranch. Anyone in town can give you directions. Why are you being so kind? Clara whispered. Parker paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. Because everyone deserves a chance to start over, and because no one should have to keep running. He settled his hat on his head. Rest now, Miss Coleman. You're safe here. After he left, Clara lay back against the pillow and stared at the rough wooden ceiling. She had expected the West to be harsh and unforgiving, expected to have to fight for every scrap of survival. She had not expected kindness, had not expected a stranger to look at her and see someone worth helping. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to cry since fleeing Marcus Whitfield's office. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, brought her a tray of food an hour later. Thick beef stew, fresh bread, and cool water. Clara ate slowly, forcing herself not to gulp it down despite her ravenous hunger. As she ate, Mrs. Henderson bustled about the room, opening the window to let in the evening breeze and laying out a clean nightgown. Mr. Vaughn is a good man, Mrs. Henderson said, smoothing the worn quilt on the bed. One of the best around here. He's got a fine ranch, built it up from nothing over the past 6 years, works hard, treats his ranch hands fair, doesn't drink or gamble. Half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him, but he just focuses on his cattle and his land. Clara absorbed this information silently, spooning up the rich stew. He doesn't usually take an interest in newcomers, Mrs. Henderson continued, giving Clara a speculative look. Must have seen something in you worth helping. He said I looked like I was running from something, Clara said quietly. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her expression growing serious. A lot of folks out here are running from something. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes what you're running from needs to be left behind. The question is what you're going to do once you stop running. Clara finished her meal and handed the tray back to Mrs. Henderson. I need to find work. I can sew, I can cook, I can clean. I'm willing to do whatever honest work is available. There's always work in a mining town, Mrs. Henderson said, though not all of it is the kind a decent woman would want. I'll ask around tomorrow, see what I can find for you. For tonight, just rest. Clara slept deeply that night for the first time in weeks, lulled by the silence of the desert and the feeling of being, for the moment at least, safe. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of activity from the street below. Her body felt stronger, though still weak from the ordeal of the journey. Mrs. Henderson brought her breakfast and a basin of water for washing, along with a simple cotton dress in pale blue. This was my daughter's, Mrs. Henderson said. She moved to San Francisco with her husband last year. It should fit you well enough, and it's better suited to this climate than what you're wearing. Clara accepted the dress gratefully, running her fingers over the soft fabric. I'll pay you back for all of this somehow. Just pay it forward when you're able, Mrs. Henderson said. That's how we survive out here, helping each other. Over the next 2 days, Clara explored Eldorado Canyon. It was indeed a small town, built around the mining operations that dotted the surrounding hills. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, the boarding house, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. The population was mostly men, miners, and ranchers and drifters, but there were families as well, women who had followed their husbands west or come seeking their own fortunes. Clara inquired about work at every establishment. The general store owner's wife said she might need help in a few weeks. The woman who ran the small restaurant on the edge of town said she could use someone to wash dishes starting next month. Everyone was kind but non-committal. Clara understood. She was a stranger with no references, no connections. They had no reason to trust her with work. On the third evening, as her time at the boarding house was running out, Clara stood on the front porch and watched the sun set over the red rock cliffs. The desert sky blazed with color, oranges and purples and deep crimsons that took her breath away. Boston had never looked like this. Boston had been all gray and shadow, buildings blocking out the light. Beautiful, is it not? A voice said behind her. Clara turned to find Parker Vaughn standing on the porch steps, his hat in his hands. He looked tired, dust covering his clothes and face, but his eyes were alert and warm as they met hers. "It's stunning," Clara said honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." Parker moved to stand beside her, leaning against the porch railing. "I came from back east too, originally, Ohio. 6 years ago, I decided I needed a change, needed to build something of my own. So I came out here with almost nothing and started working as a ranch hand. Saved every penny, learned everything I could about cattle and the land. 3 years ago, I was able to buy a small piece of property. Been building it up ever since." "Mrs. Henderson told me you have a successful ranch now," Clara said. "Successful might be too strong a word, but it's growing. I have good grazing land, a decent herd, and 2 ranch hands who work hard." He paused, studying her face. "Mrs. Henderson also told me you've been looking for work and not having much luck." Clara nodded, her pride warring with her desperation. "I'll find something." "I have a proposition for you," Parker said. "I need someone to help run the household at the ranch. Cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. I also need someone who can keep the books, track expenses and profits. The work is hard, and the ranch is 5 miles from town, so it can be isolated. But it pays $30 a month plus room and board. If you're interested, the job is yours." Clara's heart leaped, but she forced herself to think clearly. "Why would you offer this to me? You don't know me at all." Parker met her eyes directly. "Because you need the work, and I need the help. And because I trust my instincts about people. My instincts say you're someone who works hard and keeps her word. Am I wrong?" "No," Clara said softly. "You're not wrong." "Then we have an arrangement." Parker extended his hand. "If you're agreeable, you can start tomorrow. I'll come by with the wagon in the morning to take you out to the ranch." Clara shook his hand, feeling the rough calluses of hard work against her palm. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I won't let you down." "Call me Parker," he said with a small smile. "We're not formal out here." "Then you should call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "I'll see you tomorrow morning then. Be ready at dawn." After he left, Clara returned to her room feeling lighter than she had in months. She had work. She had a place to go. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she had something resembling a future. The next morning, Parker arrived just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. He helped Clara into the wagon, and they set off down a dusty road that led away from town and into the open desert. Clara watched the landscape change as they traveled, the stark beauty of it so different from anything she had known. Sagebrush and cacti dotted the red earth, and in the distance, the purple shadows of mountains rose against the sky. "The land out here can seem harsh at first," Parker said, guiding the horses with practiced ease. "But once you learn to read it, once you understand its rhythms, it gets into your blood. I can't imagine living anywhere else now." "How did you know this was where you needed to be?" Clara asked. Parker was quiet for a moment, considering. "I guess I didn't know at first. I just knew I needed to leave Ohio. My father died when I was 20, left the farm to my older brother. There was no place for me there anymore, no future. So I headed west, looking for something, though I could not have told you what. When I got to Eldorado Canyon and saw this desert country, something just clicked into place. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years." Clara understood that feeling completely. "That's how I felt when I got off the train, like I could finally breathe." Parker glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "What were you running from, Clara? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But if there's trouble that might follow you out here, I should know about it." Clara took a deep breath. She had not told anyone the full truth, but Parker deserved to know if she was bringing danger to his doorstep. "There was a man in Boston, a wealthy mill owner named Marcus Whitfield. I worked in his factory after my parents died. He decided he wanted me, that I should be grateful for his attention. When I refused him, he tried to force the issue. I escaped and ran, sold everything I owned to buy the train ticket. His influence is powerful in Boston, but I don't think it reaches all the way to Nevada territory." Parker's jaw tightened. "Men like that," he said quietly, "they think their money gives them the right to take whatever they want. I'm glad you got away from him." "I'm glad too," Clara said, "though I left with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Sometimes nothing is exactly what you need to build something new," Parker said. The Vaughn Ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, and Clara felt her breath catch. It was not large or fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch sat nestled against a hillside, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Wooden corrals held horses and cattle, and she could see the glint of water from what must be a creek or spring. The land stretched out in all directions, wild and open. "Welcome to your new home," Parker said as he brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Home. The word resonated in Clara's chest. She climbed down from the wagon and looked around, taking in every detail. Two men emerged from the barn, both weather-worn and curious. "Clara, these are my ranch hands, Joe Martinez and Tom Brennan," Parker said. "Gentlemen, this is Clara Coleman. She's going to be helping run the household and keep the books." Joe, a stocky man in his 40s with a salt and pepper mustache, touched his hat respectfully. Tom, younger and lean with red hair, did the same. Both men studied her with cautious friendliness. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Joe said. "It will be nice having proper meals again. No offense to Parker, but his cooking could use some help." Parker laughed. "None taken, it's the truth." He showed Clara through the house, which was larger than it appeared from outside. The main room served as both living area and dining space, with a stone fireplace at one end and a large wooden table at the other. The kitchen was well equipped with a cast-iron stove and good supplies. There were 3 bedrooms, one that clearly belonged to Parker, one that the ranch hands shared, and a smaller one that Parker indicated would be Clara's. "It's not fancy," Parker said, "but it's solid and well built. I made most of the furniture myself." "It's wonderful," Clara said honestly. After weeks of running and uncertainty, having a room of her own felt like an impossible luxury. "When do you want me to start?" "Whenever you're ready. There's no rush. Take some time to settle in." But Clara did not want to take time to settle in. She wanted to work, to prove her worth, to earn her place here. So she rolled up her sleeves and set about making the kitchen her own, taking stock of the supplies and planning meals. By that evening, she had prepared a dinner of fried chicken, beans, fresh bread, and apple pie made from dried fruit. The 4 of them ate together at the big table, and Clara watched the men's faces light up as they tasted real home cooking for the first time in months. Parker caught her eye and smiled, a genuine expression of appreciation that made something warm bloom in her chest. After dinner, while the men went to tend to the evening chores, Clara cleaned the kitchen and thought about how her life had changed in just a few short days. She had gone from desperate and hunted to employed and safe, and it was all because of the kindness of a stranger who had asked for nothing in return except honest work. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to make breakfast for the men, then spent her mornings cleaning and mending. In the afternoons, she worked on the ranch books, carefully recording expenses and income in Parker's ledgers. She had always been good with numbers, and she found satisfaction in organizing the accounts and finding ways to economize without sacrificing quality. Parker was a good employer, fair and respectful. He never entered her room without knocking, never stood too close or let his hands linger when passing her something. The ranch hands were equally respectful, treating her like a sister rather than an object of interest. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like she could simply exist without having to constantly guard herself against unwanted attention. But as the weeks passed, Clara became increasingly aware of Parker in ways that had nothing to do with employer and employee. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful gentleness with which he handled the horses, the quiet strength in his movements. She noticed how hard he worked, up before dawn and often not finishing until well after dark, always putting the needs of the ranch and his people ahead of his own comfort. She noticed the kindness in him, the way he listened when his ranch hands spoke, the way he rode into town to help a neighbor with a sick animal or a broken fence. She noticed that despite his rugged appearance and hard work, he had a thoughtful, almost poetic way of seeing the world, commenting on the beauty of a sunset or the music of coyotes calling in the night. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression soft and wondering, as if she were something precious he could not quite believe had wandered into his life. One evening in early May, about 6 weeks after Clara's arrival, Parker asked her to take a walk with him after dinner. They strolled toward the creek that ran through the property, the setting sun painting everything in warm, golden light. "You've done remarkable work with the books," Parker said as they walked. "You found expenses I had not even realized we were paying, negotiated better prices with suppliers, organized everything so I can actually understand where the money goes. The ranch is more profitable than it's ever been." "I enjoy the work," Clara said. "It's satisfying to see everything balanced and running smoothly." They reached the creek where water burbled over smooth stones and sat on a fallen log. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, just listening to the water and watching the light fade from the sky. "Clara," Parker said finally, his voice careful, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without any consequences to your position here." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "These past weeks, having you here, it's changed everything. The house feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep. The ranch runs better. Everything is easier." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But it's more than that. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you think about things, wanting to hear your laugh, looking for excuses to spend time near you. I know I have no right to feel this way. You came here for work and safety, not to be courted by your employer. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." Clara's breath caught. "What do you feel?" Parker turned to look at her directly, his brown eyes serious and vulnerable. "I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling the moment I saw you step off that train, looking lost and brave at the same time. And I know this is too fast, too soon. I know you've been through something terrible and probably need time before you can think about anything like this. But I had to tell you the truth. I had to let you know that you don't have to keep running, not anymore. You can stay here, not as an employee, but as someone I want to build a life with, if you want that too." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. She had not let herself hope for this, had not let herself acknowledge the feelings that had been growing in her own heart. "Parker, I came west with nothing. I'm a woman with a past she's running from. No family, no money, nothing to offer anyone." "You're wrong," Parker said softly. "You have yourself to offer, and that's everything. Your strength, your kindness, your quick mind, your brave heart. That's more than I ever hoped to find." "I'm falling in love with you too," Clara whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was just gratitude, just relief at being safe. But it's more than that. When I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm running anymore. I feel like I've finally found where I'm supposed to be." Parker reached for her hand and Clara let him take it, their fingers interlacing. "Then stay," he said, "not as my employee, but as my partner. Stay and build this life with me." "Yes," Clara said, the word emerging as both a promise and a prayer. "Yes." Parker leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Clara did not want to pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, the stars had begun to emerge overhead, countless points of light scattered across the vast desert sky. Clara looked up at them and felt something inside her that had been clenched tight for so long finally begin to relax. "You won't need to run again," Parker said, echoing his words from that first day, but with deeper meaning now. "I promise you that. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Clara felt the weight of her past begin to lift. Marcus Whitfield in Boston felt very far away now, like a bad dream that belonged to someone else's life. This was real. This rancher with calloused hands and a kind heart, this harsh, beautiful land, this feeling of peace settling into her bones, this was her life now. The courtship that followed was unconventional by Eastern standards, but perfectly suited to their circumstances. Parker moved his things into the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, insisting that Clara keep the house to herself until they were properly married. He courted her with morning cups of coffee delivered before dawn, with wildflowers picked from the desert and left on her pillow, with long evening walks and conversations that stretched late into the night. He courted her by teaching her to ride horseback, his patient hands steadying her in the saddle until she found her balance. He courted her by sharing his dreams for the ranch, for the life they could build together, making it clear that he saw her as an equal partner in all things. He courted her by simply being present, showing up every day with steadiness and care. Clara courted him back in her own way, with special meals she knew he loved, with shirts she mended with extra care, with her laughter becoming freer and more frequent, with the way she leaned against him when they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. They married in June, in the small church in Eldorado Canyon, with Mrs. Henderson and the ranch hands as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson helped her sew, and Parker wore a new shirt with his best pants and boots polished to a shine. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a traveling preacher who passed through mining towns performing baptisms and weddings, but the vows they spoke carried the weight of absolute commitment. I, Parker James Vaughn, take you, Clara Marie Coleman, to be my wife. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to build a life with you, to protect and cherish you for all my days. I, Clara Marie Coleman, take you, Parker James Vaughn, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to build a life with you, to love and honor you for all my days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Parker kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. These were not tears of fear or sadness, but of overwhelming joy and relief. She had found something she had not even known she was searching for. The wedding supper was held at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a simple but heartfelt celebration with food and music. The small community of Eldorado Canyon turned out to welcome Clara as one of their own and to celebrate with Parker, who was well-liked and respected. Clara found herself laughing and dancing, surrounded by friendly faces, feeling the final walls around her heart crumble away. That night, Parker carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, which was now truly their home. He set her down gently in the bedroom they would share, his eyes full of love and desire, tempered with patience. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I know your experience with men has not always been kind." Clara reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You are nothing like him. Nothing like any of them. I trust you completely." They came together with tenderness and passion, and Clara discovered that physical intimacy could be something beautiful when shared with someone you loved and who loved you in return. In Parker's arms, she felt safe and desired in the best possible way, treasured rather than taken. Afterward, lying with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Clara finally understood what it meant to be truly home. The summer passed in a golden haze of hard work and happiness. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Clara's careful management of the books meant they could afford to expand the herd, and Parker's skill as a rancher meant the cattle stayed healthy and strong. Joe and Tom worked hard, clearly pleased to be part of a well-run operation with employers who treated them fairly. Clara learned to love the desert, its stark beauty and hidden wonders. She learned which plants could be eaten and which were poisonous, learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle from pasture to pasture, though Parker still worried about her getting thrown or hurt. "I'm tougher than I look," she told him one day as they rode together checking fence lines. "I know you are," Parker said. "That's one of the things I love about you, but I'm still going to worry." In August, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just the change in climate and diet, the hard work and stress. But when another month passed and her body began to change in other subtle ways, she knew the truth. She was carrying Parker's child. She told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Parker, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," Clara said simply. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Parker just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and joyful that it transformed him. He let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Careful, you'll make me sick." Sorry, he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I'm just so happy. A baby. Our baby. Clara, you've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory." "You're not worried?" Clara asked. "About the expense? About how it will change things?" "Of course things will change," Parker said. "But change can be wonderful. We're building a family, Clara. That's what I've always wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Clara continued to work, though Parker became increasingly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too long. The ranch continued to prosper, and by October they had enough money saved to hire a third ranch hand, a young man named Billy who had just arrived from Texas looking for honest work. In November, as Clara's belly grew round and obvious, she and Parker began preparing for the baby. Parker spent his evenings building a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it carefully so there would be no splinters. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation and a little fear. She had never been around babies much and worried she would not know what to do. "We'll figure it out together," Parker assured her, "just like we figured out everything else." Winter in the Nevada desert was cold, but not as harsh as Boston winters. They had occasional snow that dusted the red rocks with white, but mostly it was just cold nights and crisp days. Clara loved sitting by the fireplace with Parker, his hand resting on her belly to feel the baby kick. "What do you want to name him?" Parker asked one evening. "What makes you think it's a boy?" Clara said with a smile. "Just a feeling, but if I'm wrong and it's a girl, I'll love her just as much." "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my father," Clara said. "His name was Samuel. If it's a girl, maybe Rose. That was my mother's name." "Samuel or Rose Vaughn," Parker said, testing the names. "Both sound perfect." Clara went into labor on a cold January morning in 1876, just as the sun was rising. Parker immediately rode into town to fetch Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered dozens of babies in her time. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. But Mrs. Henderson stayed by Clara's side through all of it, offering encouragement and expertise. Parker paced outside the bedroom, occasionally allowed in to hold Clara's hand and offer what comfort he could. He had faced down storms and droughts, wild animals and difficult cattle, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of listening to the woman he loved in pain and being unable to do anything about it. Finally, just as night was falling, a baby's cry split the air. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy boy. And Clara did wonderfully. She's tired but doing well." Parker rushed into the bedroom to find Clara propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Parker's nose, but Clara's delicate mouth. "Samuel," Clara said softly. "Samuel Vaughn." "He's perfect," Parker whispered. "You're both perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Clara transferred the baby into his arms. Parker held his son with infinite tenderness, this tiny person who represented their future, their hope, their love made manifest. The first months of Samuel's life were exhausting but joyful. Clara had worried she would not know how to be a mother, but instinct and love guided her through. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and increasingly alert, watching everything with wide, curious eyes. Parker was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. The ranch hands doted on Samuel as well, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to earn his smiles. Joe carved wooden toys for him, and Tom sang him songs in a surprisingly melodic voice. They were a family, all of them, bound together by loyalty and affection. By spring, Clara felt like she had regained her strength, and life on the ranch returned to a new normal that included Samuel's needs and rhythms. She learned to work with him strapped to her back in a sling adapted from one used by the Paiute women who sometimes traded with people in town. Samuel seemed to enjoy being close to his mother while she worked, watching everything with those attentive eyes. One day in April, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Clara, working in the garden with Samuel napping in the shade nearby, looked up to see a well-dressed man on a fine horse approaching. Something about him made her uneasy, and she moved closer to Samuel, her protective instincts immediately alert. Parker emerged from the barn and walked toward the stranger, his posture relaxed but watchful. Clara could not hear what they were saying, but she saw the stranger hand Parker a paper. She saw Parker read it, his expression hardening. She saw him hand the paper back and say something sharp. The stranger replied, his gestures becoming animated. Parker's response was brief and unmistakably final. The stranger rode away looking disgruntled. Parker walked back to where Clara stood, his face grim. "What was that about?" Clara asked, her heart beginning to race with old fears. Parker handed her the paper. It was a letter from a law firm in Boston requesting information about the whereabouts of one Clara Coleman, wanted for questioning regarding damages to property belonging to Marcus Whitfield. Clara's hands began to shake. He found me. After all this time, he found me. Look at the date, Parker said quietly. Clara looked. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I don't understand. That man works for a detective agency. He's been searching for you, following leads. He tracked you to Eldorado Canyon and then to me. Parker took her hands in his. I told him you were dead. That Clara Coleman had died of fever shortly after arriving in Nevada territory last year. There's no record of our marriage in Boston, and out here you're known as Clara Vaughn. As far as he's concerned, the woman he was searching for is dead and buried. He believed you, Clara whispered. I'm a respected rancher, a property owner, someone who has no reason to lie. Yes, he believed me. And even if he has doubts, there's nothing he can do. You're not Clara Coleman anymore. You're Clara Vaughn, my wife, mother of my child. You're a completely different person with a completely different life. Marcus Whitfield has no power here. Clara felt tears of relief streaming down her face. It's really over? I'm really free? You're really free, Parker confirmed, pulling her into his arms. You don't need to run anymore. You haven't needed to run since the moment you stepped off that train and started building a new life. This is just confirmation of what was already true. Clara clung to him, feeling the last vestiges of fear finally release their hold. Clara Coleman, the frightened girl who had fled Boston, truly was gone. In her place stood Clara Vaughn, rancher's wife, mother, partner in building a life that mattered. The years that followed were rich with growth and joy. The ranch expanded steadily, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. Parker and Clara made a formidable team. His skills with cattle and land combined with her business acumen and careful management. They were able to buy adjoining property, doubling their grazing land, and increase the herd significantly. Samuel grew into a bright, active child who loved the horses and cattle, toddling after his father whenever allowed. In 1878, Clara gave birth to a daughter, Rose, named for her mother as promised. Rose had Clara's coloring and Parker's steady temperament, a quiet, thoughtful child who loved to watch the clouds and listen to stories. In 1880, another son arrived, Thomas, named for Parker's father. Thomas was energetic and adventurous from the start, keeping everyone on their toes. The house that had once been too quiet now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Clara never forgot where she had come from or how far she had traveled, both literally and figuratively. She made a point of helping newcomers to Eldorado Canyon, especially women who arrived alone and afraid. She and Mrs. Henderson worked together to provide temporary housing and help finding work for those who needed it. Clara knew what it meant to arrive with nothing, and she was determined that others would have the help she had received. Parker supported her efforts wholeheartedly, often hiring people who needed work or providing supplies to struggling families. The Vaughn Ranch became known as a place where you could get a fair shake, where hard work was respected and rewarded, where people were judged by their character rather than their past. On their 10th anniversary in 1886, Parker and Clara sat together on the porch watching their 3 children play in the yard. Samuel, now 9, was teaching Rose 7 how to rope a fence post. Thomas, 5, was running in circles with a stick horse, making galloping sounds. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Clara said, leaning against Parker's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you've always been here," Parker said. "I can barely remember what life was like before you." "Quieter," Clara said with a laugh, "and probably cleaner." "And emptier," Parker added, "and lonelier, and without purpose beyond just surviving." Clara took his hand, looking at their intertwined fingers. Parker's hand was calloused and scarred from years of hard work, and hers bore the marks of labor as well. They were the hands of people who had built something real together. "Do you ever regret taking a chance on the desperate woman who stepped off the train?" Clara asked. Parker turned to look at her fully. "Not for one single moment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and those 3 wild children we're raising." "They're not that wild," Clara protested. As if to contradict her, Thomas tripped over his own feet and tumbled into the dirt, immediately bursting into tears. Rose ran to help him up, and Samuel came running to the porch to report that Thomas had fallen but was not really hurt, just startled. Parker and Clara exchanged amused glances. "Not that wild at all," Parker said dryly. Clara laughed and went to comfort Thomas, brushing dirt off his clothes and checking for scrapes. He was fine, as Samuel had predicted, and within moments was off playing again, the incident forgotten. Life continued in its beautiful, ordinary way. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities and interests. Samuel proved to have his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business. Rose was artistic and gentle, often found sketching the desert landscape or tending her flower garden. Thomas was the adventurer, always exploring, always finding new places to investigate and new things to try. Clara and Parker aged together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They still took evening walks when they could, still talked late into the night, still found joy in each other's company. The passion of their early days mellowed into something even stronger, a partnership forged through years of working together, raising children together, facing challenges together. In 1890, Samuel, now 14, began taking on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father and learning everything about running the operation. Parker was proud of his son's dedication and skill, seeing in Samuel a worthy successor to the ranch they had built. Rose, at 12, showed an interest in teaching and often helped the younger children in town learn their letters and numbers. She talked about maybe becoming a proper teacher someday, and Clara encouraged this dream, wanting her daughter to have opportunities she herself had never been offered. Thomas, at 10, was still deciding what he wanted to be when he grew up, his interests changing from week to week. One week he wanted to be a cowboy, the next a prospector, the next a railroad engineer. Parker assured Clara this was normal, that boys Thomas's age were supposed to try on different futures like hats. As the century turned and 1900 arrived, Clara found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had taken. She was 43 years old now, with silver threads in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the desert sun and smiling at her family. The frightened 26-year-old who had pawned everything she owned to escape Boston seemed like someone from a story rather than her actual past. Samuel was 23 now, running much of the ranch operation and courting a nice girl from town, the daughter of the blacksmith. Rose, 21, was indeed teaching school in Eldorado Canyon and being courted by a young lawyer who had recently moved west. Thomas, 19, had finally settled on ranching as his calling and worked alongside his father and brother with enthusiasm and skill. Parker, at 51, had aged well, his hair gone gray, but his body still strong from physical labor. He and Clara still ran the ranch together, though increasingly their children were taking over day-to-day operations. One evening, after a Sunday dinner where all three children and their respective beaux had gathered, Clara and Parker found themselves alone on the porch once again, watching the sunset over the familiar landscape they had made their own. "We built something good here," Clara said softly. "We did," Parker agreed. "We built something that will last, something our children can carry forward." "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Clara asked, "after I fainted at the train station?" "I said a lot of things," Parker said with a slight smile. "You said I looked like someone who was running from something terrible, hoping the West was far enough away to finally stop running," Clara said. "And later, you told me I wouldn't need to run again." "I remember," Parker said quietly. "You were right," Clara said. "From the moment I met you, I stopped running. I stopped being afraid. I started living instead of just surviving. You gave me that gift." Parker took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You gave me just as much. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just accumulating more land and cattle. You gave me a reason to build something that mattered." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors, the same sky they had watched countless times over the past 25 years. The desert stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful, the land that had become theirs in every way that mattered. In September of 1901, Samuel married his blacksmith's daughter Elizabeth in a wedding that brought the whole town out to celebrate. The ceremony was held at the ranch, under an arbor that Parker and Clara had built together, covered in flowers that Rose had cultivated. It was a joyous occasion, full of music and dancing and laughter. Clara watched her eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved, and her heart was full. She knew what it meant to find the person you were meant to be with, to build a life from nothing but love and determination. She was grateful that Samuel had found that too. 6 months later, Rose married her lawyer, Martin, in the small church in town. It was a more formal affair than Samuel's wedding, befitting Martin's profession and Rose's refined tastes, but no less joyful. Clara cried as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle, remembering the tiny baby she had held, the curious child, the thoughtful young woman Rose had become. Thomas showed no signs of settling down yet, declaring that he was having too much fun being young and free. Clara and Parker were content to let him take his time. There was no rush. In 1903, Samuel and Elizabeth welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Clara after her grandmother. Clara Vaughn, holding her namesake granddaughter for the first time, felt the profound continuity of generations, the way love and life flowed forward like a river. Parker, becoming a grandfather for the first time, was besotted with little Clara from the moment he saw her. He spent hours holding her, talking to her, showing her the ranch that would someday be part of her heritage. The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more changes, more joys, and occasional sorrows. In 1905, Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Clara mourned the woman who had been so kind to her when she first arrived in Eldorado Canyon. The funeral brought out the entire town, a testament to how many lives Mrs. Henderson had touched. In 1907, Joe Martinez retired from ranch work, his body finally unable to keep up with the physical demands. Parker and Clara made sure he had a comfortable pension and a small house in town where he could live out his remaining years in peace. Tom Brennan had moved on years earlier to start his own small ranch with his wife, but he and Parker remained friends, helping each other out when needed. As 1910 arrived, Clara found herself at 53, looking back on a life rich beyond anything she could have imagined. The ranch that she and Parker had built was now a family operation, with Samuel and Elizabeth living in a house they had built on the property, Thomas still living in the main house but talking about building his own place soon, and Rose and Martin visiting regularly from town. There were 5 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 7 to newborn, and the sound of their laughter filled the ranch with life and energy. Clara loved being a grandmother, loved watching Parker with the children, so patient and gentle, passing on his knowledge and values to the next generation. One evening in late spring, Clara and Parker took a rare moment alone to ride out to their favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch. They dismounted and sat on the grass, looking at everything they had built together. 35 years, Clara said wonderingly. We've been together 35 years. Best 35 years of my life, Parker said. I wouldn't change a single moment. Not even the hard times? Clara asked. The drought of 1893? The cattle disease in 1897? Thomas breaking his arm in 1895? Not even those, Parker said, because we faced them together and we came through them together. That's what marriage is, Clara. It's not just the good times. It's showing up for each other when things are difficult. It's choosing each other every single day. Clara leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, still strong despite the years. I chose well, she said softly. So did I, Parker replied, kissing the top of her head. They sat there as the sun set, painting the desert sky in the brilliant colors that never failed to move them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The desert that had seemed so alien and harsh when Clara first arrived now felt like the only home she could imagine. Do you ever think about Boston? Parker asked. About the life you left behind? Clara considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with regret. I think about how young I was, how scared. I think about how close I came to a very different life, a terrible life. And I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to run, that I pawned everything to buy that ticket west, because that decision brought me here. To you. To all of this. You were so brave, Parker said, stepping off that train with nothing, not knowing what you would find. I admired you from that very first moment. I didn't feel brave, Clara said. I felt desperate and terrified. Sometimes those are the same thing, Parker said. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. They rode back to the ranch as darkness fell, the lights from the house warm and welcoming in the distance. Inside, they could hear the sounds of family. Samuel and Elizabeth putting their children to bed, Thomas playing guitar in the living room, the ordinary, beautiful noise of life being lived. Parker and Clara entered the house hand in hand, as they had done countless times before. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. The years continued their steady march forward. By 1915, there were 8 grandchildren, and Samuel and Elizabeth effectively ran the ranch, allowing Parker and Clara to ease into a gentler pace of life. Thomas had finally settled down, marrying a widow with 2 young children and building a home on the far side of the property. Rose and Martin had 4 children of their own and were pillars of the Eldorado Canyon community. Parker's health began to decline in his late 60s, his body finally wearing out after so many years of hard physical labor. He never complained, but Clara could see him moving more slowly, taking more time to rest. She adjusted their life to accommodate his needs, making sure he did not push himself too hard, that he got proper rest and good food. In the spring of 1918, Parker fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Clara's careful nursing and the doctor's best efforts, he grew weaker. On a warm April evening, surrounded by his wife and children and grandchildren, Parker Vaughn passed peacefully from this life to the next. Clara held his hand as he died, watching the man she loved take his final breath. The grief was immense, a physical pain in her chest, but woven through it was profound gratitude for the 43 years they had shared. He had given her everything: safety, love, partnership, family, home. He had seen her when she was invisible, had valued her when she felt worthless, had loved her when she felt unlovable. The funeral brought people from all over the territory. Parker had touched countless lives through his generosity and fairness, his quiet integrity and steadfast kindness. Clara listened to the stories people told about her husband, adding them to the treasures she carried in her heart. After Parker's death, Clara could have moved to town, could have given over the ranch entirely to Samuel and Elizabeth, but she chose to stay in the house she and Parker had made their home, the house where they had raised their children and welcomed their grandchildren. She was not ready to leave the place where his presence still lingered in every room, every corner of the land. She continued to help with the ranch books, to welcome the grandchildren for visits, to tend her garden and watch the desert seasons change. She found comfort in the routines she and Parker had established, in the solid reality of the life they had built together. Clara lived another 10 years after Parker's death, remaining sharp and engaged with the world around her. She saw the youngest grandchildren grow into adulthood, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Samuel's management, saw Rose's children begin families of their own. On a peaceful evening in August of 1928, at the age of 71, Clara Coleman Vaughn died in her sleep. She was surrounded by family in the house she had made a home, on the land she had helped build into something lasting and good. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren spoke about the remarkable woman she had been. They told the story of how she had arrived in Eldorado Canyon with nothing but courage and determination, how she had met their father and grandfather, how together they had built a legacy that would continue for generations. Samuel, now 52 and graying himself, spoke last. "My mother taught us that it is never too late to start over, to build something new. She showed us that bravery looks like stepping into the unknown, that love looks like showing up every day, that home is not a place, but the people you choose to build a life with. She and our father gave us roots and wings, security and freedom. Everything we are, everything we have, we owe to their courage and their love." Clara and Parker were buried side by side on a small hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stone markers that bore their names in the years of their lives. But their true monument was the thriving ranch around them, the family they had created, the values they had passed down, the love they had shared and given freely to others. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their descendants, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Clara and Parker had laid. The story of how it all began, with a desperate woman pawning everything she owned to buy a ticket west, and a cowboy who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And in those retellings, Clara's courage and Parker's kindness lived on, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward an uncertain future, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is tell someone they do not need to run anymore. That love and partnership can transform nothing into everything, and that the most profound journeys begin with a single desperate step in a new direction. The desert sun continued to rise and set over the Vaughn Ranch, painting the red rocks in brilliant colors, the land enduring as it always had and always would. And somewhere in the wind that whispered through the sagebrush and carried the scent of distant rain, the spirits of Clara and Parker lingered, together still, watching over the legacy they had created, the family that had sprung from their love, the home they had built from courage and determination, and the simple, profound decision to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives.